So here in the 1880s, you see a thing which looks like the Titchfield Thunderbolt coming into Biggar Station. See all the people, members of the Caledonian Railway Company on the station. Bits of this still survive. There have been various ideas of restoring this railway, which I think will be a good idea. It ran up to the junction at Symington. It connected Symington with Peebles. There's some interesting stories about this, but I'll come to that next.
I think I'd be a bit worried about restoring it because I think my house is built on the railway embankment.
Oh dear. Well, here's a picture of the station with a couple of adverts and a charabanc dating to about 1905. I remember a guy who was at Biggar High School in the 1930s, and he was the captain of the the rugby team, and he had a whole train for the day to take the team down to People's for 7 and 6pence.
Wow.
That's the thing, eh? Well, when people arrived in Biggar, one of the things was they had to find a hotel. So here you see the staff and proprietors of Guns Hotel in Station Road. A friend of mine, Kathy Kirster, used to live in the top part of this building. It was a temperance hotel, as far as I know, for a good deal of time. Perhaps some of you will know differently.
The house looks familiar.
It's still there, yeah.
Yeah. This is the an early postcard of Station Road. Gradually, in the early 1900s, there was a building of villas and so on down Station Road, and this was really the result of Biggar coming into the 20th century and having good communications with the outside world, which meant that people could, for example, work in Glasgow or indeed Edinburgh and come back through Lanark to Biggar. In those days, the communications in some degree for public transport were better. The Caledonian Railway Company ran the railway on the west coast, basically. The Caledonian Railway Company was founded as a result of a meeting in Biggar, in St. Lanark.
So that's looking north, is it?
This here is looking up towards what was Brunton's. This is looking up the up Station Road. It is a very early one. Probably this picture was taken about 1900 by Archibald Brown and co. Photographers based in Lanark. As you can see, there's no cars in sight in this particular photograph.
Yeah.
And this here is the cars coming at the moment. Having a quiet time here, Bonny place, very wet. This was on the morning of July the 21st, 1910. This was about 10 days before the Lanark Air Show. And here says, "My horse is doing fine." George Pedden of the Ayrshire Yeomanry Camp, Air Yeomanry Camp, and came from Biggar, the B Squad. And obviously he had a fancy for Miss Jeannie Boswell at Hill End. Quite an interesting social thing. The cards, the message is always worth reading, and although I haven't got it with me tonight, some visitor in the early 1900s said, "I'm having a fine time. I came to Biggar and had all my teeth out." No, sorry, it must have been the previous picture, which was correct with that one. Here is the Catcher's Brig, and it's quite interesting, a rural scene with a guy with his 2 cows, and you can, one of the interesting about old postcards is finding out about the businesses. One way of researching them is to look at the old guidebooks, the old books like Crockett's Biggar, which has a number of adverts in it. These are always useful. It is alleged that William Wallace crossed this. It's a load of bunkum. This bridge, the Catcher's Brig, was built much later.
So that's your garden on the left, is it, Janet?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah. The tree isn't there anymore, but yeah, that's it. That's the end of my garden, just on the far left.
Also,
Laura's flat that I've just round the corner.
brewery nearby, and here you
That
can
is my
see
house.
the gaswork. This is quite a good picture of the Catcher's Brig. It is alleged that Wallace crossed this dressed up as a merchant, selling his wares to spy out the English camp. The only unfortunate thing is the alleged date for the Battle of Biggar coincides with the Battle of Roslin, which is a historically attested fact. Okay. So this next one, the reference at the bottom, A6684, is actually a reference to the fact that this is a card produced by Valentine's of Dundee, and there's a list of dates that is available, and this one was produced in the 30s. It's quite a nice and pleasant picture of St Mary's Biggar, which was the last collegiate church to be built in Scotland. The main work undertaken in 1547, the time of the rough wooing, was undertaken by the Fleming family, Malcolm Fleming, Lord Fleming, I should say, give him his proper title. The style of architecture is of interest because it is Flemish. The windows are very typically windows you would find in churches in Flanders at this particular time. I don't have any sort of old postcards of the Mott and Biggar, but I thought I'd put that in because that was, of course, the first castle used by the Fleming family. It lies in the grounds of the Gillespie Moat Park mats, of the Moat Park mats, I should say. And one of its uses in more recent times was to be a vantage point for the Home Guard to stop the German panzers getting into Biggar. They did do some damage by digging slit trenches into its surface. We certainly won't be allowed to do that now. And here is Biggar, Boghall Castle. Now this is a fine view of the northwestern tower. Only its stub remains because it fell down around about 1912. And collapsed as a result of a storm. Originally, Boghall Castle was by way of a tower house originally in 1450. Then there was a circuit of walls which surrounded it, and they were built in 1580. This is one of the towers. You can see the gun loop. This saw a bit of action in the final years of the Civil War. 1650, after the Battle of Dunbar, it was besieged. And in that era, the 17th century, of course, there was much activity to do with the Covenanters. And I thought, well, it was appropriate to put, although I don't have a postcard of it, Green Hill in it. So I gather it's been bought over, so I watch with interest to see what happens with this fine 17th century building, which was moved by Manpower Services from Green Hill near Wiston. Here is Rohit Terrace. Much of this was built in the 19th century. Originally, there were some thatched cottages at this point, overlooking the bit between West Row and the other part of Biggar, the park. I'm just trying to remember the name of it. Here is quite a nice view of the municipal buildings and the Moat Park Church and the parish church. The 19th century was a period when Biggar really sort of took off. Even the arrival of the railway and the development of agriculture and the increased prosperity of the area enabled a lot of investment to be put in to Biggar as a community. Of course, connections with the outside world began to improve, and here we see in the 1920s the arrival of the motor car. And of course, in these days, Biggar had some a quite nice line of trees and so on in its main street, and it was very popular with tourists from Edinburgh and elsewhere. It was really from about the 1920s, a century ago, that Biggar really took off in a big way as a tourist destination and also a place for a a day visit from nearby towns such as Lanark. And this was a big stimulus. As you can see, there's a place called the Central Tea Room on the right-hand side of this photograph of the main street. By the way, Biggar, like Lanark, had quite wide streets, and partially it was due to the sort of planning of the borough of Barony of Biggar in 1451.
Pity we lost those trees.
Yeah, quite. One of the things which has disappeared at the beginning of the 19th century was the Old Course Now, which was a sort of mound with the Meccat cross. The top bits of this are in, of course, the Corn Exchange, the gable end. You can see some of the old style houses that once formed an important part of central Biggar in the old days. In 1820, this cross was badly damaged by a bonfire to celebrate the wedding of Caroline and George IV. Wasn't particular. George IV wasn't, what was I going to say, particularly fond of Caroline, and that was another issue. But allegedly, when they were removing this mound, they found a gold Roman aureus. Present circumstances were unknown. This, by the way, is one of the pictures from Grace Carrick Ward. The painting, I think, was done by Pearman, famous Biggar painter.
So, okay.
And here is the Corn Exchange. Looks as though it's taken on one of the Adrika days. It's quite a nice one insofar as we've got the Jubilee Fountain. I think that was probably set up for the Jubilee of 1887, but of course there were two major Jubilees. That was the Jubilee of 1887 and the Golden Jubilee of 1897.
So, just a question on that one. If they had that Jubilee Fountain there, where was the bonfire on Hogmanay?
There wasn't.
So they didn't have it then?
No.
Oh, I thought it had gone on for years and years.
No.
Centuries.
I think it was something that Brian Lammy started off. You certainly couldn't have that there. No, I can't recollect reading anything about it.
Okay.
And here is the Jubilee Fountain in all its glory in front of the Elphinstone Hotel. Unfortunately, I think it was post-war that it was taken away. It certainly wasn't taken away, as many people believe, for scrap at an earlier point in time. Here is the Elphinstone and William Owens. This is a 1900-ish picture, and it shows the entrance to what you can do. Sorry, oh yes, take that one. Sorry, I'm also putting stuff up on the web on Clydesdale's heritage, and one of my volunteers is working on that as well. So we're doing several things this evening. You see the big archway that goes to the back of the Elf. That's where the horses and carriages came in. The Elphinstone as a hotel goes back to the 1780s. Captain Gross and Captain Riddle, who did a historical survey of Scotland, stayed here at the Elf when they were doing their work on Bockhall Castle.
Okay.
This is a view of Broughton Road. That was another part of Biggar which expanded in the particularly in the 1920s. And here you see introduction of gas lighting. The gas originally, when it was introduced to Biggar in the 1840s, for a family home, the cost was 4 shillings and 6pence for a year's supply of coal gas. But it was just for lighting, mind you. Then it proceeded to supply gas for ovens. This shows who this picture is provided for. This is a winter scene in Biggar by St. John's, St. John's a group, a Masonic group, and here you can see the band parading in Biggar. Their main day was, I believe it was in June, but this is a rarer picture. I don't know if there's any other pictures of this particular procession. Processions in Biggar were quite an interesting event, going back many centuries. And one of the things which chiefly amuses me is that if anybody was, a man was found to be misbehaving himself, he was tied to a pole, hung on the pole, and carried by the women round the town to hoots of derision, which I think is quite, so that's what would have happened to Mr. Epstein if he'd committed his offences in Biggar in the early parts of the 19th century.
Well, maybe we could reintroduce that, Janet.
This here is one of ours. I got, by the way, a book which issued in 1940, which describes the history of Biggar Bowling Club. And here you see some of the bowlers. They were called the Old Brigade. They started off just by the Mott, by the Gillespie, by the Moat Park Manse. This was originally the bailey of the castle, which they duly destroyed. Later they moved from that. These people were well known in the south of Scotland as champion bowlers. Anyway, the present bowling club opened up in the early parts of the 20th century, and they did a lot of good. And here you see they entertained wounded soldiers and sailors in 1917. So that was quite a thing. Entertainment in the early part of the 20th century included the creation of a boating lake, and I think the building directly ahead was one time a hospital up at the not the Dar Reservoir, I think it was Colour, and it was moved to Biggar. So this was a source of pleasure, and of course later on came the caravan park. Harry Ward has done a great deal of work in promoting the early history of golfing in Clydesdale, and this is in the 1920s when the present golf course was open for business. Originally, I think the first golf course was just outside Biggar. It was not very far from the place where the first Murrays had their factory for the, or works for the early cars. So here is the golf course that they actually open with the fine houses built in the 1920s fronting on to the golf course. Circus came to the town, to Biggar, and one of the ways in which support for the circus was drummed up was having the elephants, and there's a camel over to the right, to wander through the streets to just get the public going. You know, wouldn't be allowed to do that today on health and safety grounds, let alone anything else. Here's a view of the Kirk style in Biggar. Quite a nice car, but as you can see, cars were quite a rarity. There was a bus service introduced, really a regular bus service just after World War I, to various places, and a regular bus timetable. Here is a picture of the War Memorial at Biggar in 1921. This is a period where most war memorials were, and that's 100 years ago. And here you see all the assembled dignitaries. This is another aspect of war, and here Biggar's always had a very close connection with Polish people, and of course General Sikorski came to visit Biggar in the early 1940s. They did an amazing job, did the Poles. In fact, they shot down more German planes in the Battle of Britain than the British did. They had a score to settle with the Germans. That's it, folks.
That was fantastic. Thank you very much. That's really interesting.
Wonderful.
I've lost you. We've lost him.
No, you haven't lost.
Oh, there you are. That was fascinating. Any questions from anybody?
Just one point about West Row, which you probably know anyway. My daughter and her husband live in 1 West Row, which is the house right in front of you as you go up the Wynd. Now, it's a two-story house now, but investigation of early photographs and looking at the house, it was built as a single-story weaver's cottage.
Yes, that's right. Weaving was the thing in the West Road.
Probably about 1760 is the oldest date that it's known to be there. And it had basically two big rooms downstairs. One had the loom in it, and the other one had the people, basically. And there was an attic up in the roof. But
Yeah.
and then it was modified sometime in the 19th century to have bedrooms upstairs.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, that's really interesting. It's great that we still got those photographs.
What's the oldest postcard that you've got of that exists of Biggar, Ed? Just
I think round about 1900.
right, yeah.
The big period for postcards was 1900, 1920, because there were no phones really for the majority of people. And roughly, say in about 1910, 120 million postcards were posted annually.
Wow.
No, it was interesting you're saying the golf course, because I was doing a bit of research about the golf course because I'm trying to persuade South Lanarkshire Council that Biggar has some common good land, which is an uphill struggle to persuade them of it. But one of the things was that the lower part of the golf course, as you say, between the pond and Heavyside, was originally a 9-hole golf course, and that was created in 1907 or shortly thereafter. And then, as you say, there was an expansion in the 1920s up towards South Crofts, and more land was acquired at that point, and it became an 18-hole golf course, I think around about 1924. So the original golf course is still part of the current golf course, I think, but it's been expanded up towards the town to become an 18-hole. So some of the area that they expanded onto, I believe, was originally known as the Staines Sewage Meadow and was used for distributing the contents of a septic tank before the current sewage works was built. So it must have been a well-fertilised golf course.
Yeah, I imagine so. A small hoard of Edward I's pennies was found near the golf course. Oh,
Yeah.
probably about 60 years ago.
Edward I.
I'm not sure what the details are. Another hoard, which is well recorded, was found at Cross Clyne. Cross Clyne at one time was the boundary between England and Scotland in the reign of Edward III, after Edward III's victory at the Battle of Halidon Hill.
Ah. So these Edward I coins, could they be connected with William Wallace having pinched them or something?
Could be, but William Wallace is not known to have been much in action in Biggar, as far as I know. In fact, nobody knows.
Can I ask, where exactly was the now mound with the market cross on it?
It was, you know, the front of the Corn Exchange, it was there.
Ah, and then it was replaced by the fountain.
Yeah.
Okay, that's useful.
So was it a natural mound or was it a man-made? But now, because on the picture it looks like it's pretty big for something to be in the middle of the high street. But
I think it's probably artificial. Sorry.
That's interesting. Have we got Linda?
I think she's on mute at the moment because I put people on mute during the talk.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, can hear you.
Right, I have a book, Ed, printed in Biggar in 1900. And at the back, they have a series of walks and drives. So even in 1900, they're just saying splendid driving and cycling road, gradients easy. And the outings round Biggar and West Linton, and so it must have been attracting visitors then.
I recognise it. I've got that book, Crockett.
It's lovely.
It is, it's very useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's worth knowing about.
If you want to know anything more, go to our site on Facebook, Clydesdale's Heritage, do a search for Biggar, and a whole load of stuff will come up. Also go on to our our website, and you can do a search in the gallery for pictures relating to Biggar.
Right, is that Clydesdale Heritage?
Yes, all
But
one word.
only if you're on Facebook, is that?
No, you can also find us on the web, but we're modifying the site at the moment.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay then. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Coming along, Ed. Thanks.
Excellent.
Thank you.
It was very